Herzlich willkommen, liebe Zuschauer, zu einer weiteren Folge von Im Auge des Bruders mit Scott Ritter, hier auf unserem YouTube-Kanal Gegenpol. Mein Name ist Monique Stegemann und in dieser Woche geht es um folgende Themen. Die Hisbollah droht Israel, aber ist sie stark genug für einen Krieg mit Israel? US-Flugzeugträger und US-Atom-U-Boote im Mittelmeer. Was planen die Vereinigten Staaten? Und Machtkampf in der Ukraine. Droht ein Sturz von Präsident Selenskij? Hallo Scott, schön, dass du dir wieder die Zeit genommen hast. Wenn du möchtest, starten wir direkt mit der ersten Frage und blicken zunächst in den Nahen Osten. Vergangene Woche sprach der Anführer der Hisbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, davon, dass die Hisbollah nicht länger gewillt sei, das Vorgehen Israels im Gaza-Streifen zu tolerieren. Die Hisbollah sei bereit und alle Optionen lägen auf dem Tisch. Aber hat die Hisbollah wirklich die militärischen Kapazitäten, um Israel herauszufordern? Wie stark ist die Hisbollah und welche Strategie würde sie in einem Krieg gegen Israel verfolgen?
Well, first, I think we need to make sure that the record is accurate. He didn't say that Hezbollah would not tolerate Israeli actions in Gaza. He said he would not tolerate an Israeli escalation of the events in Gaza. That the conflict is between Hamas and Israel, and the conflict, as long as it proceeds in a way that meets the objectives of Hamas, namely the liberation of thousands of Palestinian prisoners, the end of the desecration of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the creation of a Palestinian state. That these objectives were Hamas's objectives, and Hezbollah was not going to intervene. Hamas wasn't asking for an intervention. He did say that if Hamas is threatened with destruction or defeat, that Hezbollah would intervene because they would not accept an Israeli victory. He also noted that that Hezbollah will do its part to maintain pressure on Israel to divert military resources away from Gaza. And he pointed out that because of Hezbollah's ongoing engagement with Israel, that 70,000 Israeli troops that otherwise could be deployed in Gaza were instead shifted to the north. A quarter of Israel's Air Force is dedicated to the north. Half of Israel's Navy is dedicated to the north. He pointed out that nearly 30,000 Israeli settlers had been evacuated from the north into the interior, and that this, combined with the 300,000 reservists called up, was causing economic distress for Israel. And that he said that Hezbollah will continue to maintain this kind of pressure on Israel, and that if Israel wants to escalate, then Hezbollah will, of course, match that escalation. Now, I think we need to also understand that Nasrallah made it clear that he was not looking for escalation, that he does not desire a fight. And if you take a look at the historical context of this conflict, and remember, it's a conflict started by Hamas without any prior coordination with Hezbollah. So Hezbollah is not a party to this conflict. The other thing is that Hezbollah has been focused almost singularly so on the problems of Lebanon. Hezbollah is a political party that is deeply engaged in the politics of Lebanon and is not looking for a fight with Israel. This would actually push both Lebanon and Hezbollah in the wrong direction, because any conflict between Hezbollah and Israel, no matter how Hezbollah comes out in the end militarily, will lead to the economic devastation of Lebanon and many thousands of deaths. And it's just not the direction Lebanon needs to be heading right now. So it's not the inclination of Hezbollah to seek confrontation. However, if there were to be confrontation of an escalatory nature, meaning that it becomes full-scale conflict, Hezbollah has the means to defeat Israel strategically. First and foremost, Hezbollah has sufficient rockets that will flood the Iron Dome defense system, causing Israel to rapidly deplete its interceptor missiles. already Israel's having a supply issue with these interceptor missiles because of what Hamas has done and the amount of rockets fired by Hamas. If Hezbollah were to fire 100,000 unguided rockets, that would be the end of the Iron Dome system. Then Hezbollah has another 100,000 guided rockets, precision-guided munitions that would be able to rain death and destruction on Israel without any prospect of intervention by the Iron Dome or any other Israeli air defense. Israel's a small country, and when you finally plot out the economic, the military, the political targets, there aren't 100,000 targets. Hezbollah knows where everything is in Israel, and Hezbollah would destroy this. This would be the end of Israel as a economic, political, and military power. And this doesn't even begin to get into Hezbollah's own considerable, conventional ground force capability. Hezbollah has a very large standing army. They call it a militia, but it's an army, of 50 to 80,000. Many of these are combat-hardened veterans from the fighting in Syria. They know war. They know the business of war. They've been studying Israel. They've been planning on how to overcome Israel. There's reason to believe that they have extensive tunnels that have been dug from Lebanon into Israel that will enable them to rapidly pierce the Israeli border and deploy hundreds, if not thousands, of troops instantly into the Israeli rear areas at the time when Hezbollah is also engaging, fixing Israeli forces on the border. There's a real risk that Hezbollah could, especially since Israel is so strategically committed to Gaza, that Hezbollah would be able to seize northern Israel up to the Sea of Galilee, and in doing so facilitate the recapture of the Golan Heights by Syria. So the fact of the matter is, while Israel may be able to punish the Lebanese population, the Israeli army is not capable of defeating Hezbollah in a stand-up fight, especially when so much of Israel's power is focused on Gaza.
Anfang der Woche gab der israelische Ministerpräsident Benjamin Netanjahu bekannt, dass Israel beabsichtige, den Gazastreifen auf unbestimmte Zeit besetzt zu halten. Dabei hatte US-Präsident Joe Biden noch vor kurzem öffentlich ausgesagt, dass eine Besetzung des Gazastreifens ein Fehler wäre. Dazu 2 Fragen an dich, Scott. Erstens, ist Israel in der Lage, den Gazastreifen zu besetzen? Und zweitens, zeigen sich in der Frage nach dem Vorgehen im Gazastreifen Risse zwischen Israel und den Vereinigten Staaten?
Well, I can announce that I'm traveling to Las Vegas and I'm going to take my winnings and buy a mansion in a new sports car. But first I have to win. Traveling to Vegas is the easy part. Winning at the table, the odds are against you. Netanyahu is involved in a conflict with Hamas in Gaza. That's the easy part. Winning is the difficult part. So, I don't think you should count your chickens before they hatch, especially if you're Benjamin Netanyahu, a president or a prime minister of Israel who has been disgraced, totally disgraced. And I'm not talking just about his corruption that he, is in the process of destroying Israeli democracy in order to prevent a judiciary from holding accountable to the crimes he has committed here. I'm talking about his failure as a leader. He is the man who presided over Israel during Israel's greatest defeat on October 7th. This is a man who has a 0 popularity rate in Israel anymore. He's holding on to power only by the benefit of continuing to prop up his flagging political career by embracing war. He won't be prime minister much longer, so no one really cares what he says. No one really cares what he thinks, because it's the vocal expression of a man with no political future, none. He will go. He has to go. The Israelis agree. There are thousands outside of his residence right now demanding that he go. Any political leader worth, that has any semblance of pride would have resigned. But Netanyahu is not about pride. He's a narcissist. He knows that if he resigns, he will be held accountable to Israeli law and he will spend the rest of his life in jail. So he's desperate right now. But I really let me put it this way. The people who resolve this conflict aren't going to be, among their ranks, aren't going to be anybody named Netanyahu. So what he says right now, frankly, doesn't matter. And anybody who was tainted by October 7th isn't going to be there as well. So all these generals, all these politicians, all these ministers you see out there puffing their chest out and talking, they're all disgraced. They're all losers. They're the ones who created the conditions of Israel's defeat, and they're all going to take a hike.
Lass uns da nochmal ins Detail gehen. Gibt es Risse zwischen den Vereinigten Staaten und Israel? Zwischen den Vereinigten Staaten und Netanyahu?
Absolutely, there are. The United States has encouraged Israel not to do what it's doing, which is a large-scale ground incursion, because there is no plan for victory. Israel right now is occupying relatively open space. When we look at the map of where Israeli forces have moved into, it's largely open spaces, and they've suffered heavy casualties as a result. Hamas fighters are coming up out of the tunnels, taking out Israeli tanks, killing Israeli troops. They have yet to move in a significant fashion into the center of Gaza, into the heavy urban areas. This will be a completely different fight. And, Israel right now is focused on a fight above ground, but Hamas is below ground. They haven't come up with a strategy to deal with that. And the longer this fight goes on, the greater global recognition is of the ongoing war crimes that Israel is committing against the Palestinian people become known. And Israel has lost the support of much of the rest of the world. The global South, upon which the United States has so much hopes pinned on for our own future relevance as a global leader, we're losing the global South because of Israel. Israel has become it's a detriment to America. It's no longer an asset to America. And this is creating problems because, historically we have been, sort of blind supporters of Israel. We turned a blind eye to the crimes of Israel. We can't anymore. And I think you're seeing that there's growing animosity within the Biden administration, within the U.S. government towards Israel's arrogance and their refusal to acknowledge that not only do they not have a plan on how to win, they don't know what victory looks like. Whatever they're doing is just making matters even worse.
Die Vereinigten Staaten haben in den vergangenen Wochen ihre Militärpräsenz im Nahen Osten sukzessive ausgebaut. Dort operieren mittlerweile 2 Flugzeugträger-Kampfgruppen, eine Vielzahl von US-Kriegsschiffen und jüngst verlegte die US-Marine mit der USS Florida ein Atom-U-Boot der Ohio-Klasse in die Region. Die USS Florida wurde 2011 zuletzt in Kampfhandlungen eingesetzt beim Sturz des libyschen Präsidenten Muammar al-Gaddafi. Zu welchem Zweck summierten die USA eine so große Zahl von Kriegsschiffen in der Region? Welche Kampfkraft haben diese Flotten und wie können sie eingesetzt werden?
Well, it's a show of force for deterrence. The United States is flexing its muscle in an effort to back up the warnings that they've given to both Hisbollah and Iran not to intervene. What the United States fails to recognize is that, especially in the case of Iran, Iran has prepared for a full-scale conflict with the United States. Full scale. That means the total military capacity of the United States. Iran has prepared to go to war against that. So once you make that level of preparation, a handful of aircraft carriers does not scare you, does not intimidate you. Iran is not looking for a fight, but they're definitely not afraid of a handful of American aircraft carriers, 2,000 Marines on board a couple ships, or even an Ohio-class submarine. At the end of the day, is the United States threatening to nuke Iran? That's sort of what it means when you pull out an Ohio-class submarine. Iran's not afraid of it. They're not looking for a fight. They're not afraid of it. Hezbollah is not afraid of the United States. They're not looking for a fight. This is being done for domestic political consumption and to appease Israeli sensitivities, so that when we sit down and we talk to the Israelis, we can say, look, we're backing you up with this mighty deterrence force. So you might want to actually, listen to what we're saying and maybe implement policies that align with us when it comes to how to resolve this situation. the two aircraft carriers, have several hundred combat aircraft. Israel has that many and more. It's not changing Hamas's point of view. It's not going to scare Hisbollah. So having a handful of American aircraft join the fight isn't going to alter anything. 2,000 Marines. Look, I'm a former Marine, and I love the combat potential of a Marine. But 2,000 Marines, there are limitations to what even Marines can do, and 2,000 isn't enough to do anything more than maybe get involved in some rescue operations for Americans or evacuation operations. But in terms of a genuine on-the-ground combat presence, it's not sufficient, nor is it sustainable. So there's really not much there. It looks good on paper, but in reality, it's a lot of bark, not so much bite.
Wenden wir uns nun der Ukraine zu. Dort verdichten sich die Anzeichen, dass es hinter den Kulissen einen Machtkampf gibt zwischen der Regierung von Präsident Wladimir Selenskij und der Militärführung unter General Valery Zaluzhnyi. Zaluzhnyi hatte vergangene Woche öffentlich geäußert, dass die Ukraine den Krieg gegen Russland nicht gewinnen könne. Er wurde daraufhin öffentlich gerügt vom Präsidentenamt. Am Montag starb nun Zaluzhnys Assistent auf tragische Weise durch ein Geburtstagsgeschenk, gefüllt mit Handgranaten. Wie bewertest du die internen Vorgänge in der Ukraine? Erleben wir tatsächlich einen Machtkampf? Droht möglicherweise ein Militärputsch?
We're definitely witnessing a power struggle. It's been going on for some time now. There's been tension between Zaluzhnyi and the military and Selenskij. Selenskij has always been again, from a governance standpoint, he's the commander-in-chief. And, ostensibly there's civilian leadership and control of the military. And what's given him relevance is that he has been the figure around which the international community has rallied. He became a Winston Churchill-like figure, and he was able to get the world to contribute hundreds of billions of dollars worth of military aid and financial aid to sustain Ukraine. And the military recognized that without Zelensky, they weren't getting the equipment and the money they needed to continue this fight. But the military's also come up with the reality that, A, they've received all this equipment and they've lost. The Russians have beat them. And B, Zelensky's star is waning. He's no longer able to attract the attention that he wants. And so I think, a military commander worth his salt is going to say, I don't want to see the continued destruction of the military that I care for. And regardless of whatever I think of Zaluzhnyi as a person, remember, he's a man who smiles when he's photographed next to a photograph of a portrait of Stepan Bandera. So he doesn't score too high on my list of quality individuals. But he is a military man. He cares for his military. And I think he's tired of sending them off to suicidal attacks only to appease a political leader who has no military experience and whose relevance has become significantly diminished over past months. There is a struggle between the presidential administration and the military. I don't know how the death of Zaluzhny's deputy plays into this, whether this was a targeted assassination or just stupidity of the highest degree. He pulled the pin. So I do, and I have been saying for some time now that one of the main scenarios for conflict termination is a military coup. That at some point in time, the Ukrainian military is going to be tired of executing suicidal orders, and they will turn their guns on those who are giving these orders. And that time could be coming rather soon. Zelensky, I think, is not long for this world as the president of Ukraine. He's not politically viable. His administration is collapsing from corruption, from inefficiency, from the fact that nobody will take his phone calls or take his meetings anymore internationally. He's no longer a useful leader. And if he continues to demand that the Ukrainian military commits suicide against the Russians, the military may come to that same conclusion too.
Mit der allmählich schwindenden Unterstützung des Westens, wie lange kann sich Selenskij noch an der Macht halten? Und wird er einfach zurücktreten?
I don't have a crystal ball. So I can't I can't say that. I don't think Zelensky will easily step down. He gave an interview to Time magazine where he holds on to continue to believe that he's a messiah-like figure that is singularly capable of solving Ukraine's problems. So I think there's enough narcissism in this man to have him hold on till the last minute. That last minute may come soon. He can't. Zelensky has no ability to stand up to the military other than the notion of democratic rule, the supremacy of civilian rule over the military, and people willing to adhere to that. Just like Joe Biden in the United States, if an American armored division rolled up to the White House, there's nothing Joe Biden could do to stop that except to appeal to them as men who took an oath to the Constitution of the United States and say, you will not violate that oath. Fortunately, in the United States, the way our military is trained and educated, the officers believe this. This is their core value. So they would never roll up a division to Washington, D.C. That's the opposite of upholding and defending the Constitution. That kind of belief system, I don't think can be said to be viable in Ukraine anymore. And I do believe at some point in time the military will take matters in their own hand.
Bleiben wir bei der Frage eines möglichen Militärputsches in der Ukraine. Wenn es zu einem solchen Putsch käme, würde das Militär Friedensverhandlungen mit Russland aufnehmen? Würde es versuchen, den Krieg mit Russland zügig zu beenden?
Again, you're asking me to get into the mind of people who I don't personally know. I would say this, that if the military intervenes to remove Zelensky, it's because they want a fundamental change in the policy direction of Ukraine. Now, one such policy change would be to assume a strategic defensive posture designed to wait out the Russians, that rather than sacrifice your military strength in a futile counteroffensive, to conserve your military strength and to make the Russians pay a heavy price for their continued offensive operations. That's one military mindset, and this would be a mindset that people who refuse to admit that they've been defeated by Russia or refuse to surrender. Others would say that even that scenario is fraught with problems, that it just ultimately leads to the total destruction of Ukraine, and that the genuinely patriotic thing to do is seek as early a termination of this conflict as possible to preserve as much of Ukraine as possible. And understand that there might be a brief moment of civil war in Ukraine as forces who do not want to surrender lash out against people who are seeking to surrender. So, this could lead to some internal duress as well. But the bottom line is Ukraine is in a genuine political crisis, and it's only going to get worse. And the divide between the civilian government of Zelensky and his military commanders is deep, and it could very well lead to total collapse and violence in Ukraine.
Russland hat sich nun offiziell vom Abrüstungsvertrag über konventionelle Streitkräfte in Europa, kurz KSE-Vertrag, zurückgezogen. Das russische Außenministerium begründete das mit dem destruktiven Verhalten des Westens. Prompt reagierte auch die NATO und setzte das Abkommen auf Eis. Bereits zuvor hatte sich Russland aus dem Vertrag zur Verringerung strategischer Waffen und dem Vertrag über den Stopp von Nukleartests zurückgezogen. Wie bewertest du das Vorgehen Russlands, diese Verträge aufzukündigen? Und was bedeutet das für die Welt und insbesondere für Europa? Werden wir eine ungebremste Aufrüstung erleben und neue Tests von Atomwaffen?
Well, let's just make the record clear. Russia didn't withdraw from the New START treaty. They suspended their participation in that treaty, citing the incompatibility of the notion of a disarmament agreement with a nation that seeks the strategic defeat of Russia. That so long as the United States is seeking the strategic defeat of Russia, Russia will not be involved in a treaty that seeks to limit the weapons it relies upon for strategic deterrence. So there's a logic behind the Russian thing. If the United States wants a strategic arms treaty relationship with Russia, then there needs to be a political environment that's conducive to that, a normalization of relations the termination of this regime change mindset that exists in Washington, D.C. On the strategic on the nuclear test ban treaty, all Russia did is align itself with the United States. They didn't withdraw from the treaty. They terminated their ratification of the treaty while saying they will continue to adhere to the treaty so long as everybody else does as well. This is the same posture that the United States has taken, the same posture that China has taken, two nuclear-armed nations that have not signed the treaty but continue to abide by the prohibition on nuclear testing. So for the moment, it appears that nobody's willing to cross that threshold and begin a nuclear test. But once one nation does, you'll see all other nations fall in place, and that's the beginning of a genuine nuclear arms race, because the purpose of testing would be not only to certify existing weapons designs, but to certify new weapons designs for new weapons. And when you start deploying new weapons, that's sort of a signature of an arms race. On the Conventional Forces in Europe treaty, the treaty's literally lost all relevance given the ongoing buildup by NATO. Remember, the treaty collapsed. One of the reasons why it collapsed is that NATO absorbed 3 Baltic republics, Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, but refused to have the military forces there and the force structure and posture there be considered as part of the Conventional Forces in Europe treaty. NATO did a number of things that Russia deemed to be incompatible with the intent of the treaty. And so Russia suspended its participation. Now that NATO is calling for the expansion and deployment of a 300,000 man rapid response force, now that the United States has put 100,000 men back into Europe, including many in Poland, the forward posturing of NATO, combined with Russia's response, which was to expand its military from 900,000 to 1.5 million, and together with the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, which in and of itself is a travesty when you think of the Conventional Forces in Europe treaty. The Conventional Forces Europe treaty was designed to prevent this very kind of conflict. There's no reason for Russia to continue to be part of this treaty. And what Russia's doing is, in effect, clearing the books, because Russia speaks of the need for a new European security framework. What you don't want, if you're heading down that direction, is to be tied down by legacy treaties that were written and premised on the notion of, Cold War geopolitics. There is no more Warsaw Pact. The CFE treaty was between NATO and Warsaw Pact nations. There is no more Warsaw Pact. There will have to be a reimagination of European security, hopefully one that diminishes the role played by the United States and focuses on Russia versus Europe. And so by getting rid of the Conventional Forces in Europe treaty, Russia's not only being honest about the true nature of the current situation, but it's also actually making it easier to move forward with a new security framework discussion after Russia's victory over Ukraine.
Du hast bereits über das möglicherweise bevorstehende atomare Wettrüsten gesprochen. Vor kurzem wurde bekannt, dass auch China sein Atomwaffenarsenal aufstockt. Müssen wir mit einem globalen nuklearen Wettrüsten rechnen? Und kann die NATO in diesem Wettlauf mit Russland und China mithalten?
Well, first of all, let's just remember that NATO is not a nuclear agency. To the extent that NATO has nuclear weapons, they come in the form of American weapons, French weapons, British weapons. The American weapons, 100 of them, B-61 bombs, have been incorporated into a NATO nuclear deterrent force, meaning that in case of conflict, the United States can transfer control of these weapons over to 5 identified NATO nations who have aircraft specifically designated for the delivery of nuclear weapons so that NATO can participate in a nuclear conflict. That gives NATO the ability to sit in on nuclear planning strategy, et cetera, so you don't have 2 distinct strategies. But, if there's a nuclear arms race, you're not going to see NATO. NATO doesn't build nuclear weapons. Nation states build nuclear weapons. There's a real risk that Russia and the United States are already in an arms race. Russia, back in 2018, began a program of nuclear modernization in response to American ballistic missile defense initiatives, and Russia has deployed all of these weapons, and these are weapons that make missile defense absolutely useless. These are weapons that the United States can't match right now with our aging nuclear force. So the United States is getting ready to spend many hundreds of billions of dollars to modernize its nuclear force. There's nothing against modernization. I mean, I ultimately believe that the best posture for the world is a global zero, meaning no nuclear weapons in the world. But if you're going to have nuclear weapons, they should at least be attached to a viable policy of deterrence, which means that you should say we have the means to destroy any nation who attacks us first with nuclear weapons. And in order to back up deterrence, you need to have weapons that that can be used. They're not too old, they don't work, etc. So it's not that the United States shouldn't be allowed to modernize its force, but to modernize our force and to have Russia modernize their force without any overarching arms control framework in place is dangerous, because it could lead to the kind of fear-based misunderstandings that not only accelerate arms, but create potential areas of friction where these weapons could be used. So it's a very dangerous situation. I think China's tired of being threatened by the United States. I think China takes a look at the United States deploying missile defense in the region, and they do the calculation that says that missile defense capability linked to forward deployed American submarines and bombers could lead to a preemptive nuclear attack by the United States on China that would largely eliminate China's nuclear weapons, and any weapons that were left could be shot down by these missile defense. Therefore, China no longer has a nuclear deterrence capability because they aren't capable of deterring. Deterrence requires you to be able to perform a lethal second strike, that you absorb a first strike and you can still take out your enemy with a second strike. China doesn't have that right now, so they're in the process of modernizing and enlarging their nuclear posture so that they can ride out an American first strike. And this is, again, normal, but it's not the direction we want to be heading. We don't want to have China creating new nuclear weapons. We want China to be comfortable with the United States and Russia working to decrease their own arsenals. So the reality is today there's no framework of meaningful arms control in place anymore. For the first time since the early 1970s, we are operating in a arms control free environment, and this is a very worrying development.
Vielen Dank, Scott, für die aufschlussreichen Analysen. Wir freuen uns schon auf nächste Woche.
Thank you very much.
Dankeschön. Meine lieben Zuschauer, auch an euch, herzlichen Dank fürs Zusehen. Wenn euch die Sendung gefallen hat, dann teilt das Video doch bitte breit in den sozialen Medien, abonniert eben noch unseren Kanal Gegenpol, folgt uns unbedingt auch auf den Plattformen Odyssey und X, ehemals Twitter, und vor allem, wenn ihr mal Fragen habt, die wir unbedingt an Scott Ritter stellen sollen, dann schreibt sie uns doch in die Kommentare. Ich freue mich auf euch, eure Monique.